Hello again. Hello, everybody. So, if you're watching this on replay, I'm going to give this a minute. I just ended a live video on media, how media contributes to rape culture. So, I wanted to end that video and come over here and start a new one for conversation. So, welcome, everybody. Please say hello. So this live really is just a conversation to further what I was talking about on the other video. So bring your thoughts, your comments, questions even that you might have about it. But I'd really like to, I would really like to hear your thoughts. Maybe even sharing some of your own awareness or experience with how this has shown up for you. Hi, Lindsay, Sharia, Barbara, Princess, Colleen, and Jack. Hello, everybody. Thank you for hopping over here on this live to join me for this conversation. So I don't know if you guys all were part of, I know some of you were, I don't know if you were all part of the previous conversation. I'll check that in just a second, Barbara. But I just did a YouTube live on the media's contribution to rape culture and how we can work to change it, all stemming from some headlines here in the US about a congressman being investigated. So bring your thoughts. I really would like to hear just your thoughts and experiences. Let's join together. Let's join together. This made me think about Sexual Assault Awareness Month and maybe just having this be kind of an ongoing conversation throughout this month and see what we might be able to shift in how, in particular, the media talks about this. So the more, the better. Sorry, I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see better. What, in your opinion, has people minimized sexual abuse and assault? Well, I think there's a variety of things. I think, and I actually did think about this specifically earlier. I think because there are so many people who are survivors, and many, I would argue probably most, survivors are still somewhat in some form of denial or minimization about their experience. So maybe they know something happened that really shouldn't have happened, but they minimize it and say, well, it wasn't really that big of a deal, or it was a long time ago. But people who haven't been able to kind of accept the reality of their own experience for what it truly is, tend to avoid or even deny the reality of it for themselves and unfortunately for other people as well. And so there can be this sense of really just not wanting to talk about it, not wanting to face the reality. And for some people that don't necessarily even have a history, the truth is that when you look at the number of people that have experienced sexual abuse or assault, it's pretty overwhelming. It can feel impossible to have any sense of being able to keep ourselves safe or be able to do anything about changing it. And I get that. But that leads to people feeling somewhat paralyzed by it. So if you feel paralyzed by something, you're typically going to avoid, minimize, or deny it. And I also think that for many people, not just men, but women too, we can look at our own behavior sometimes in regards to a sexual encounter, sexual relationship. And it wouldn't necessarily be defined as something like sexual assault, especially not criminally, um, or maybe even like sexual harassment in terms of a criminal definition. But I think for many of us, we can look at situations and see behavior that maybe we don't feel good about. And if there's any shame attached to that, then our natural inclination, not conscious, is going to be to avoid talking about any of that. So I think that's part of it. I think, like, in terms of these types of headlines, calling out somebody as a perpetrator, there's a lot of energy with that. And of course, there's the reality of innocent until proven guilty, right? And so, again, the media, responsible media, needs to be careful about how they refer to people. But I think in that, when we call somebody a perpetrator, there's this feeling that can be there that doesn't feel good because so many people, in some form or another, have been perpetrated against, right? Like even like I can't think of the term that was used in like the housing situation, predatory lenders, right? So even somebody who had that kind of a home loan from a predatory lender, like that can feel really unsettling to think of a predator or a victim. And so we naturally tend to kind of move away from that. But in moving away from that language, we keep it more mystified. We keep it more put away to where we can't really look at it or address it. So even if it's uncomfortable, we have to bring it into awareness. If we could bring sexual abuse and sexual assault, conversations about that, the reality of it, into normal conversations, so much would change. I was going to name like one or two things, but so much would literally change if we were able to do that. The shame that survivors feel would be so diminished. And if it's diminished, then they're going to get help for healing. They're going to report it. If we talked about it more, then even somebody who is abused or assaulted for the first time isn't going to feel that shame. They're going to have language for it. So they're going to feel more comfortable coming forward, whether it's to a friend, to the police, to a therapist, whatever it might be. So we need to talk about this. We need to use the correct language, right? Just like if you think about body safety and how parents, but adults would never use the correct terminology for genitals, right? Like they come up with weird names or down there or your privates or whatever. And that creates more mystification. It furthers children from truth. It creates the sense of there's something not okay with it because we have to use this weird word. That's not what it's really called. And so then there's this unease around it and shame around it. Fortunately, parents and teachers and physicians are using actual language because they recognized, and this has been quite some time ago at this point, but they recognized that it's important to name it so that if a child experiences abuse or if they're having pain or something unrelated to abuse, but if there's a problem, they have the language. They don't have the shame attached, so they can talk about it. And the more I'm saying this, the more I'm feeling like, okay, this month is going to be about talking about it, naming it, calling it what it is. We have to talk about it. Natalie, I have not seen the movie The Tale. I'm interested though, what that is. In fact, let me make a little note here. I know I need to watch, maybe this is one of the things I'll talk about in terms of naming. Dylan Farrow and Woody Allen. There's a documentary that I've been asked several times if I've watched, and I haven't, but I might be talking about that soon. Sexual assault and rape makes society so uncomfortable. They would rather say sexual relationship with a child than confront what it really was. Absolutely. And what is really sad about that is the child will do the same thing. Like, that literally just breaks my heart, because ultimately it's that child, and any child in that situation, who's going to be deeply affected potentially for the rest of their lives. Because if they don't know that there's anything wrong with it, then they don't know that there's anything to heal. In fact, they will adamantly say, and I've met people like this. In fact, I was one of them. Oh, there's nothing to heal. It didn't affect me. There was nothing wrong with it. It wasn't that big of a deal. It is a big deal. I really hate hearing things like this. It's the same situation when describing men versus women with the same personality traits, things like leader versus bossy, depending on gender and things like that. Yes. Yeah. This point about like men and women, obviously this is bad for any survivor. But I also think that, like, I gave that example just a few moments ago in the other video about teachers. And if it's a male teacher and a female student, and really probably even a male teacher and a male student, but if it's a male teacher, then, and that actually this happened not all that long ago, but if it's a male teacher, they're talking about it a little bit differently. When it's a female teacher and a male student, then that's like, they really talk about it then as a relationship. And that is horrible for males who have been abused, to hear that. Because if they too have been abused by a female, then they're literally being told, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. Oh, you should feel happy about that. Good for you. Like, people have actually said that to male survivors. I've worked with them. And so there are a lot of things like that that are really, really messed up. Another thing that really bothers me, is, and this was happening, I'm in Arizona in the US, and there was a case, it's been a while ago now, but it also happened with JonBenet Ramsey, which was from years and years and years ago. But that one, I think, probably made more headlines. The fact that she was a little white beauty queen versus a little black girl here in Arizona. That's a whole other issue, equally as important. But anyway, this little girl was missing, and she was found, and she had been abused. She unfortunately was found dead. But during the media, as it was being talked about, they kept referring to her as this beautiful little girl. And it's true, she was a beautiful little girl. But what the hell difference does that make? You could argue that all children are beautiful, but that's not what they were referring to. They did the same thing with JonBenet Ramsey, a little girl made to look like an adult. And even female adult victims, they will comment on her appearance, on how she looked aesthetically. Was she aesthetically pleasing? Beautiful. And if not beautiful, then there's no other complimentary way of describing her. Somehow, unless you fit the person's standard, then your death somehow doesn't matter as much. That's another time that I wrote in to the media. But again, we're so accustomed to it, right? We hear this so often that it doesn't even really register. Like it might create some sense of energy in our system, but we don't really know what it's about. We might just chalk it up to, well, there's a little girl that's missing. But I think a lot of us hear things like that and are like, wait a second, that doesn't feel right. So I've had issues with a lot of this stuff for quite some time. Not abused. This touches me personally. I said in the first discussion, when we diminish the actions of adults, puts the burden of guilt and shame on the child. Absolutely. It absolutely does. I personally struggled so long with sex versus rape in my own healing. It took so long for me to believe it wasn't sex. This kind of shit is why it took so long. Exactly. Exactly. And this is why it's so important that those people, the people in those positions, and a lot of positions, like any position of influence or authority, that when they talk about it, it needs to be talked about in an accurate way. There's a reason that we minimize it so easily, because our culture minimizes it. Our culture blames us. So we already blame ourselves. And then when the culture somehow, through a headline like this or other ways, also then blames victims, well, there's proof. Everybody believes that I'm at fault. Everybody believes it wasn't a big deal. It was just a sexual relationship. Oh, you know how he is. He's just over familiar or whatever. No, that isn't how he is. If he's doing that, then he's a perpetrator. It is that simple. Now, I get it's not simple to say, it's not simple to talk about, but that is the simple reality. You're very welcome, Barbara. Feels powerful. I wish more people could hear it. Me too. Thank you, Jack. Feel free to share this for any of you. Feel free to share this or the first one with people that you know, because we really do need to start having conversations with everybody. The truth is that half the population has some sort of sexual abuse or assault. Around half the population. But this conversation needs to happen with people who are not necessarily survivors, or maybe don't see themselves as a survivor. It can't just be survivors who have these conversations, just like it couldn't be just Black people fighting for civil rights. It couldn't be just women fighting for women's rights. It can't be just the LGBTQ community fighting for their rights. We all have to step up. We all have to be a part of the conversation. Yes, just thinking more about conversations. Hi, Isabella. Welcome. Better late than never. The problem isn't just the way in which it's described, it's the amount of people not getting charged. Even when people come forward, the rates are alarming. Descriptive words are dangerous. Absolutely. I agree with you. The people not getting charged. And I believe that part of the reason, that people aren't being charged is because of how society views the reality of sexual assault versus a sexual relationship, or they were drunk, or making excuses, basically. And so when society views it that way, then it's a lot harder for the criminal aspect, the legal aspect, to be able to do anything about it. Because again, a conviction requires either a plea, generally, or a jury to convict. And juries, even if in the US, even if a district attorney decides to bring a case to court, the likelihood of getting a a conviction from the jury is fairly small. And I think the two things kind of go together, without a doubt. And the more that we have conversations about it, the more that we stand up and call it what it is, and kind of force the criminal justice system, from the police on the scene to the detectives investigating to the district attorney choosing to prosecute to the judge. Like, all of those pieces need to happen for that to really shift. And it starts with conversations, by us in our little circles, talking about it using real and true language. The Tale was a documentary, I think, that you mentioned, based on a true story. A woman in her late 40s realizes that she was raped when she was 13 years old by her 40-year-old coach. Until she was 45, she saw this as her first love relationship. Yes, I cannot tell you how many times I have heard similar stories, very similar stories. Even with a child and their parent. And in terms of healing, that is a very, very complicated road. It can happen, but it is a very long, complicated road to travel, for sure. I do understand why people think 17 is a gray area in consent age, but this girl was allegedly sex trafficked. Same thing with language. Child prostitutes. Oh yeah, child prostitute. Another one. Yeah, and that one comes up quite often. Yeah, a child cannot be a prostitute. Legally, I don't know. I actually don't even know if there's a true definition statute-wise for child prostitution. There may be, but I'm not quite sure about that. But here's the problem, and again, state by state can be a little bit different. Like, I think in the South, the age of consent is sometimes lower than it might be in some other places. That's obviously a general statement. There could certainly be places in the North, but I remember working in rape crisis. It was more like Southern-ish states that would have sometimes a lower age of consent. But we have to be able to identify it at some point, right? Technically, whether if it's a criminal definition or not, we are not an adult in this country anyway until we reach the age of 18, right? You can't even drink in many states until you're 21. I think you can't smoke cigarettes until you're 18, technically. So 18 is legal, is when you become an adult. And whether it's 17 or not, when we are talking about, like, you can identify those nuances later. And I'm not saying, I think like a 40-year-old having a relationship with a 17-year-old, that's obviously quite different than a 21-year-old or a 20-year-old having a relationship with a 17-year-old. Now, technically, in many states, if somebody wanted to, they could potentially charge that 20-year-old for sexual assault against that 17-year-old, even if they started dating when he was 17 and she would have been 14, which still would not be really good. But then it would have been legal, right? So criminally, I think it is important that we look at that. But when it comes to looking at the broader languaging, the broader reporting of it, in a headline especially, when a headline says, being investigated for sex with an underage girl, underage girl, that isn't okay. And what's really that much of a difference between 16 and 17? There are a lot of 16-year-olds who are far more mature than 18-year-olds. It is a gray area, but I feel okay like leaving that to the Department of Justice. I feel okay leaving that to the justice system. I don't need to decide that. We don't need to decide that. We just need to understand the impact that it has. But I do agree with you, Candace, that when it comes to particularly like the criminality of it, that there are things that need to be considered. And in some places, a 21-year-old and a 17-year-old is not a problem. It's like it's not seen as a big deal. And in many cases, maybe it's not. But we also typically don't see those kinds of headlines. The headlines we tend to see are the much kind of more likely to be sexual assault. Hi, Kelly. I'm so grateful to everyone who keeps educating what is sexual abuse and assault. Even in 2021, I've heard older women blaming girls for sexual assault by how they dress. Yeah, and it is amazing. And I've even heard young people blame people for being sexually assaulted, for drinking, for wearing something. And again, this goes back to Barbara's question at the beginning about the difficulty that we have in talking about it, and even the criminal justice system and juries. Prosecutors generally do not want, are generally are not crazy about women on a jury for sexual assault, because whether a woman has been sexually assaulted or not, it feels better to be in denial. If we can blame that other person for it, then we can feel safer. If we can blame that other person for it, then we can say, well, I would never do that, so I'm going to be okay. Or if somebody does have their own history and they haven't been able to really kind of acknowledge the reality of that and work to heal it, then their own shame can be projected onto somebody else as well. And I have seen that happen far too many times to count. Again, blaming the victim. The way the lawyers are allowed to assassinate the character of the victim in court is also a disgusting issue. They make them look like they are to blame. Absolutely, Isabella, that is a huge, huge, huge thing, which is a big part of the reason why people will not come forward. Because it's one thing to go to the police and have to go through an examination and all of that. Like, that's bad enough. But then to go through all of that, to relive it over and over by telling the police and the investigators and the district attorney, to then have to go and testify, to look that person in the face, and then have your character destroyed, be made to blame for what happened. How can we expect people to come forward? Truly, it's ridiculous. My essay to get into grad school was, I majored in social work, bachelor's and master's. And my essay to get into grad school was on the re-victimization of sexual assault survivors in the judicial system, talking exactly about that. Hi, Tim. This conversation has me questioning my own beliefs and judgments, and it makes me uncomfortable. This, I fear, is part of the problem. Allison, thank you so much for saying that. Thank you. So I'm reading into this. I don't know if it's exactly what you're intending or not, but what I'm hearing here with like this, I fear is part of the problem, is how these kinds of conversations can bring up our own, ultimately it's ideas about our own experiences, our own fears about things that we might think or feel or have experienced. And that discomfort is part of the reason, again, going back to Barbara's question, that discomfort is part of the reason why people use those kinds of headlines, and then why we as a society accept those kinds of headlines, because it feels better, right? If we hear that somebody's had a sexual relationship with somebody underage, oh, that's horrible, and we can go on about our day. If the headline said this US congressman used his power to manipulate and destroy a child, that would feel a lot different. But that, in very real ways, is the truth, if it actually happened. So I will say that, if it actually happened. But let's just pretend that it did happen. It feels better to hear the former. We don't then feel overwhelmed with what to do about it. We aren't as easily triggered within our own stuff. But until we can face it as individuals, as survivors, as non-survivors, as society, as institutions like media and justice, until it can be spoken about authentically from a place of reality and truth, it will never change. Going back to what's happening with the murder trial of the officer who killed George Floyd, if it hadn't been named, if we hadn't seen it and been named for what it was, like even if we had seen it, but they kept referring to it as the death or an accidental death or the unfortunate death in a situation where he was being arrested or whatever, the outrage would not have happened. And it is the outrage that has created the circumstance, the outrage at the injustice, the demand for justice, for change. Those voices, that truth being spoken, that's what has already changed things in some places here in the US. The way police are being funded, getting social workers actually into more police precincts, training, educating, barring certain types of ways of interacting with somebody that you're questioning or arresting. That happens because we notice that discomfort and honor that. It's important to honor that. It feels uncomfortable for a reason. That is your soul, your heart, letting you know that something doesn't feel right about it. And often it's because you have a personal connection to it. Whether it's somebody that you know or for yourself. And when we see injustice, when we experience injustice, it tears at our soul. How many of you, when you see those commercials for abused animals, right? Even if you aren't very emotional generally, those kinds of commercials get to you. Because when it comes to an animal, we don't blame the animal. We can blame a sexual assault survivor. We can blame people. Like, we can find a reason, right? For most people, we don't blame an animal. And so when we see those commercials, we feel that pain. We see the injustice and we want to do something about it. And that is how things change. And I had hoped that with Me Too, particularly the second time around, when all the, again, influencers, all the celebrities got on board, the media, I hoped that Me Too would have shifted more than it did. But here we are a few years later, and nothing has really changed. More people spoke their truth, which is good, but on a grander scale, on a more macro scale, nothing has really changed, which is why we have to continue to have these conversations. So honor where you're at with that, Allison. Please just be really, really mindful of not judging yourself. Please, please, please. And for anybody else maybe who might be judging yourself in some way, please be really mindful of that. Don't do it. Don't do it, please. Natalie, another one I have not seen or heard of, Athlete A. Oh, about Larry Nasser. So I do know that story. Yeah. So this is kind of a little bit different, but and yeah, I could do a whole thing on that too. In particular, how he could get away with it for so long. The truth is that he gets away with it because survivors feel ashamed and they don't speak up. Like, that is ultimately why. Now, having said that, I want to be very, very clear. That doesn't mean that the survivor is then at fault for other people being abused. That's not at all what I am saying, because that is not the truth. But there are a lot of reasons that survivors don't speak up, right? And we've talked about that quite a bit today. Because again, if people talked about it, if it was part of normal conversations, if when we saw a headline that spoke the truth and then we talked about it in our circles with our children that are sitting there watching it with us or whatever, or our children who see it on social media and then ask us about it, if we talked about it in a realistic way without having to go into a lot of detail, then when it happens, you'd have language for it. And then you'd be able to talk about it. But perpetrators like him, and in the US, we also had, and I can't think of his name right now, a football coach. Can't think of his name. But anyway, he also had a lot of victims. But people in those kinds of positions often do have sometimes hundreds of victims because they have access and they're in a position of authority. And the people that they have access to are often vulnerable in some way. And they look up to this person, right? This person holds a lot of authority and power over them. So that's That's the unfortunate reality. But again, the more we talk about it, the less likely something like that is to continue to happen. Those 4 years with the president backing his locker room talk didn't help. It absolutely did not help. And it did actually help, I believe, exacerbate the issue and made people much more bold in lots of ways that are really horrible behavior, sexual assault, racism, intolerability, like all kinds of things. Ali Risman was on the podcast from Chair Expert. Yeah. And I know Ali Risman spoke a lot, and she talked very openly about her experience, which is great. It helped other people know that they're not alone. Certainly, I'm very grateful to her. I think it's also important to recognize that, like, how many of you have similar stories? Maybe not an Olympic athlete, maybe not a really well-known coach or a well-known person who is your perpetrator. But her story is actually very similar. For many of you watching this, live or on replay, a lot of similarities in her story. We know her because of her position being elevated, right? She had a platform to talk about it. Her coach was the Olympic coach, so he was very well known. But many of us have similar stories that deserve to be heard as well. I saw a story on the news about a church group not allowing women on their fishing fundraiser because of the worry of Me Too and men being falsely accused of things. Wow. 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 I'm not even really quite sure what to say about that. Yeah, I don't even know what to say about that, but it is kind of crazy. It really just really shows how much inaccurate information there is, how many myths continue to be perpetuated, which is why we need to be able to talk about this. And again, I'm not asking for any of you to go out and publicly talk about this, but I know that so often it can feel overwhelming and like, what do I do about it? Again, noticing it within yourself first, reframing it when you hear something or see something that doesn't sit quite right, something about it doesn't seem right, just acknowledging that within yourself. Like, okay, wait a minute. That isn't okay. Like, really allowing yourself to accept that. Don't tell yourself you're overreacting. Don't tell yourself you're being dramatic. Acknowledge that. Feel into that. Feel the feelings associated with that, whether it's frustration or fear or disappointment, whatever it is. Let yourself feel that. And then maybe participate in a conversation with one other person or your small group of people, engaging in something on social media. Each voice matters. Whether you have 2 seconds of something that you want to say or 2 hours of something you want to say, whether it's to one person or a million, Every voice in this conversation matters. And every time that one of us speaks the truth about it, it reverberates out. It makes the conversations shift in terms of how we talk about it, even how we talk about it within ourselves, right? Instead of saying, I had sex with this person, being able to say, this person assaulted me, which is what the truth is. Of course, when it is that, I'm not suggesting that all sex is sexual assault. But if you were a child, unless that other person was a child, it was not sex. It was sexual assault. Even if you thought it was a loving relationship, it is sexual assault. Let's see. Natalie, I actually have a video. Oh, wait, no, unbelievable. I'm not sure what unbelievable is. You've seen a lot of things that I've not heard of. I guess I need to pay a little bit more attention. I think it's particularly difficult when you're a teenager, like Allie was, and like some of us were, because you aren't at that point in your life when you have a firm grasp of what's okay and what isn't. Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is one of the reasons why if we talk about it more and start talking about it with children, it will change. It will begin to change things. I'm not suggesting that it's going to end it, but it will certainly decrease it. And even when it does happen, then children will come forward because they won't be afraid of not being believed. They will have the language for it. They won't feel the shame about it. Okay, so another one to check into, unbelievable. All right, somebody please tell me what unbelievable is. I need to know. Maybe that's another one to talk about. So it's easy to question if you've never had a physical therapist or gynecologist before and it's your first experience. I'm not sure via what you're referring to there, but I'm still furious at the principal of a boarding school here called the historical sexual abuse of children at her school as a small number of incidences of unpleasantness on TV. Yeah. Yes, and that's a really powerful example of the importance of language. Unpleasantness? Really? We refer to rain as unpleasantness. I don't talk about minimization. That is ridiculous. Oh, okay. Colleen, I'm not sure I'm understanding here. This, maybe of course, do you believe when there is a history of childhood sexual abuse, then assault, I find myself taking responsibility for lots of shame that is not mine to hold? I think what I'm understanding there is a history of sexual abuse, and then you also are sexually assaulted. That happens a lot. I would say most of the people that I know have had that happen, even if they didn't initially name either one of them. But even if they named sexual abuse, they may not have named the sexual assault. I actually had that experience. When I was 14, I think, I was assaulted, but not until, I don't know, a few years ago, maybe. I mean, I remember the experience and I knew that it was bad, but I never actually referred to it as sexual assault until just a few years ago. I didn't feel shame around it or anything anymore, so I did the healing that I needed to do around it, but I never actually conceptualized that as sexual assault. But it is very common for people who have a sexual abuse history to end up being assaulted in life later on down the road, sometimes multiple times. And there are a lot of reasons why that can happen. So I'd hope, Colleen, that was what you were referring to. Okay, so this must be unbelievable. I thought about the first victim who was not believed and accused of, made the whole story up to get attention. Yeah, that's a very common theme for a lot of people. And part of that is self-protection. Part of that is ignorance. Part of that is just not being a very nice person at times. Is the chat saved? I believe that after a little while, when the live video is done, I believe that after a little period of time, I think it needs to do something in its system, that you will see the chat, that you can see the chat when the comment was made. So it's set with where the video is, if that makes sense. I believe that is the way that it works. Victims are often accused of wanting attention or being a whore or a slut, and so instead blaming somebody else. Lots of ways that victims are blamed for it. Someone who has not experienced assault does not understand. There's certainly a lot of truth to that. There needs to be more available resources to teach people of the effects. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think that would be really helpful. And I think one of the challenges over these last few years too has been that there are a lot more people talking about abuse and assault, but quite a few of them who are talking a lot about it don't necessarily, they talk about it from being kind of like an expert in it, like they're talking about it as an authority of it, and they're not. And so they end up perpetuating, again, a lot of misinformation, a lot of things that they say will help you heal that are likely not going to really help you heal long term and may even potentially make things worse. So yes, we need more people talking about it from personal experience. We need more people who do have training and education to talk about it as well. Sorry, the chat keeps kind of jumping up and I think I might be missing something. All the people I've talked to about what happened to me had never heard of it before, so it's hard to explain the impact it had. Yes, and when you're met with people who don't understand it and you question yourself, it's really challenging to try to, from a place of kind of confidence, help people understand something that you yourself still struggle with fully accepting or understanding or not feeling shame around. Oh, yes, I did see that. Unbelievable. Okay, thank you, Jack. I did see that. Yes, it was very good. And I feel like I did a video about this, or maybe I wrote about it. This was a while ago. Um, I took notes, so I'm almost positive that I've actually done a video about this, or maybe I wrote it somewhere. I don't know, but I'm gonna see if I might be able to find that. Have you watched Spotlight? Yes. Yes, also, really impactful, and I think a really important film that really needed to be done. I have worked with survivors of people who were abused, within the church. Um, yeah, just thinking about how sorry, it just takes me back to one person in particular that it was just a really sad situation. But yes, a very good movie and a really important movie that definitely needed to be done. What advice do you have for people who are threatened that if they do not do something inappropriate, they were going to be in trouble? And when survivors stand up to the individual is manipulating their relations with others. Let me start with this first part. What advice do you have for people who are threatened that if they do not do something inappropriate, they were going to be in trouble? Okay, first of all, recognize that that is still sexual abuse or sexual assault, depending, of course, on what the situation was. But it's still a perpetration of sexual violence. And what is really challenging about that is when a survivor does something, so when they actually engage in some way, then they take that as proof, and sometimes the perpetrator will too, but they take that as proof that they were a part of it, that it was mutual, that they're to blame, that they're responsible, certainly that they have a lot to be ashamed of. No. If somebody is making you, and it doesn't even have to be a threat of harm, it could be a strong suggestion, it could be a manipulation, it could be a coercion, it could be a bribe, but it is still abuse. So that's, I think, a really important thing to recognize. It is still abuse. You are not at fault for that. Um, and I think that in terms of the question here, I think that might be the most important thing. And then recognize certainly, obviously, that because it's abuse, that there's a lot there to heal. And depending on who it is, there may be a whole lot of betrayal that is a part of that as well. I'm not sure that I'm understanding this next part. And when survivors stand up, the individual is manipulating their relations with others. Okay, well, actually, I think I do understand that now. This is really challenging. So basically, the perpetrator, when you try to say something or stand up around it, speak up about it, then that person somehow manipulates kind of the interactions or the relationships there, is what I'm taking from it. This is quite common. This is something that's really, really difficult to navigate on your own. So first, I would say, please work with somebody to help you really navigate this because it's not easy. Boundaries is going to be an important part of that. Really understanding what your boundaries are in that situation and then working towards being able to implement some boundaries around that. But that takes a lot of understanding about boundaries. It takes a lot of practice and it takes support to be able to do that. Do you have any thoughts on the Boy Scouts of America as far as why it's not spoken about as much? They're paying out billions in settlements for sexual assault, but we only know about it because my son is in it. I haven't seen it publicized much at all, which seems weird. I haven't seen it talked about too much lately. I remember that maybe it was a particular case. I'm not sure. I do remember hearing about it, but um, the Boy Scouts of America, I believe, I'm not that familiar with it, but they have kind of a lot of power. And organizations and people in positions of power have the ability in a variety of ways to direct narrative. And so um, I'm sure that there has been a lot behind the scenes to help kind of quiet some of that narrative. I'm also guessing with a settlement that the people that they settled with probably are not able to talk publicly about it. And I could be wrong about that. I actually have no idea for sure, but generally speaking, oftentimes in settlements like that, the people that are part of that settlement are not allowed to talk about it. So if the people involved are not able to talk about it, then there's likely not going to be that many people who are willing to talk about it. But in terms of it happening, I'm really not surprised. The reality is that any type of organization, any type of setting where adults are there and they have a lot of access to children, and particularly if it's children that are coming for for community, for support, for that kind of thing, those children are often a little bit more vulnerable. And people in those kinds of positions of authority and power tend to be very trusted. And so in those kinds of settings, unfortunately, it can lend itself to being a place where a perpetrator is going to be drawn to spend time. I just thought of that person's name, and now I forgot it again. That coach that I referenced a while ago. Jerry Sandusky, maybe, or something. But he created an organization to help kids that I think maybe lived in certain areas, or kids that didn't have fathers around, or I don't remember exactly what it was. So children who were really wanting and needing a safe space and attention, and to have this famous coach be interested in you. That's the kind of setting that somebody like him can really take advantage of. Oh, thank you, Candace. Well, I'm glad that you and all of you are here being a part of this conversation, because again, each voice matters. And the more voices we have, the more impact we have collectively. Because I can't do this on my own. I've been trying for 20 years. We all need to use our voices. With nightmares that reoccur, have you any thoughts on rescripting? I read a bit today. Does that work? So I don't have a lot of thoughts about it. And I think, I don't know that I like that term rescripting. I don't know is necessarily a term that I'm specifically really familiar with, but I think that it's similar to kind of the idea of creating a different narrative around it. I think there's always benefit to working to create a different narrative. Of course, depending on what that different narrative is. So I can't really speak a whole lot to it today. Can children imagine abuse though there aren't real facts, just strong feelings about it? So imagining abuse is different than strong feelings about it and believing that you're abused. So I actually the last Q&A I did, I think it was the last Q&A, we talked about this, but I also have a separate video that I did on healing when you don't have clear memories. So that might be a good video for you to check out. And I think that's the name of the video, Healing When You Don't Have Clear Memories. Or do you need clear memories to heal, or something like that. It's very, 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 very rare for a child to imagine abuse if it didn't happen in some form. And if you don't have clear memories, it can create some additional challenges to healing, because you have more difficulty trusting yourself that it actually happened, that there is in fact something to heal. But it is incredibly rare for a child to make up something like that. Incredibly rare. Back in the fight, yes. And please do not make me do it alone. Okay. Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for being here. I see some new names that are kind of new to me, I think. You might have been on the other video. I didn't take the time to really look at comments on the other video, because I was hoping it would be short enough that more people might watch it, because sometimes when they see a video that's over an hour long, they'll watch like the first few minutes and that's it. So I wanted to do it separately. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for being open to this conversation. Thank you for maybe being with some of that discomfort that might come up. That's not an easy thing to do. It takes strength to be able to do that, and it takes courage to be able to do that. And it certainly takes both to be able to reframe in your own mind and certainly begin to have conversations with other people. And so again, one of the things that you can do is share the video that I did. You can follow me on social media and share some of the posts that I do. Again, I shared on my profile page yesterday a post and a meme talking a little bit about this. So sharing my stuff, if you don't feel comfortable having conversations, you can just share my stuff, or other people's stuff for sure. But that's a way to kind of get the conversation going and to keep this conversation going. So I just thought about it today, so I don't know what it's going to look like, but I am going to, throughout this month, continue to have these conversations. I will be doing another Q&A live here on YouTube next week. On the 8th, that will be my regular day, the second Thursday of each month. I will be doing a live Q&A. Alternating between one month I will do it at 12 p.m. Pacific. The following month I will be doing it at 3 p.m. Pacific to help people in different time zones be able to watch, because I know those of you in Europe, 3 p.m. is a little late for you, but I also know that people in the US, 1 o'clock is a little too early, and even 3 o'clock might be a little bit too early. So I'm going to try a couple different times and see how it works. So I will see you next week, but please stay tuned. If you're not following me on social media and you are on social media, Facebook is where I do the most. You can follow me on my Peggy Oliveira page or Courageous Journeys, but I'm sharing more on Peggy Oliveira for some reason. I reach more people there, even though I have far fewer followers. Courageous Journeys or Peggy Oliveira. Instagram, I don't interact a whole lot there, but I'm trying to share my stuff on Instagram as well. Not really on Twitter too much. And then obviously here on YouTube as well. So let me just go back through this again. Natalie, hopefully I just answered your question. Isabella, yes, thank you. Liking the video helps with the algorithm. Commenting also helps with the algorithm. Same with social media. Commenting even with like a little smiley face with an emoji or a GIF or something, GIF, whatever it is. Commenting on something, even if you don't say anything, really does help with the algorithm as well on Instagram and Facebook. So that helps more people see it. I don't understand it. Like, I've got 900 people who follow Courageous Journeys, but on an average post, there are maybe 40 people that it reaches. That's not even people that actually like engage with it. That's just the number of people that will actually potentially see it. I don't know why that happens. But the more reactions, so likes, hearts, that kind of thing, and then some sort of comment really does help. Same here with YouTube. And I'm guessing most of you have found me because there was a suggested video, right? More of those will show up. More of my videos will show up. It will show up more frequently. It will show up in people with larger audiences. It will show up in their videos the more that people like and comment on my videos as well, so that we can together collectively change this conversation, which changes the shame, because the shame is not ours, right? Hashtag not our shame. So bring your questions to the Q&As. Bring your questions to the Q&As. And I believe if you're not able to join live on the Q&A, once I believe that this is the case, once I schedule the live Q&A, and for the scheduled ones, I do it usually 24 to 48 hours in advance. I may start doing it a little bit sooner, but once I've scheduled it, make sure you've subscribed to my channel and make sure that you click the little bell for notifications. Once I schedule it, you should get a notification. I believe that you can go ahead and comment on it. So if you're not going to be able to join live, you can leave a question there. I'm almost positive about that. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Universal Lights. Welcome. Yes, many of us fighting. Some of it's professionally, some of it's as a survivor, some of it is as an ally, and it all matters. It's all needed. All of it is needed. Well, thanks for being here now, Michelle. All right. I don't understand TikTok. I don't even understand Instagram stories or reels or TV or whatever the heck it is. I've tried. I really have. I guess that says something about my age. I don't know. I might look into TikTok. I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to try some different things maybe this month. I am a creature of habit, so new things take me a little while to get into. Thank you all for being here. I will look forward to seeing you next time. And thank you for being a part of this really, really important conversation that has the potential to truly shift how we talk about this, and therefore how we feel as survivors and how we approach the idea of healing. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.